little bit, but we have a lot to cover, so I want to make sure we have enough time. Okay, cool. Am I good to?
You should be.
Okay. I'd like to call the Associated Students of Western Washington University Executive Board meeting of November 30th to order at 5:33 p.m. Are there any revisions to the agenda today? No, okay, so next year we're going to be moving on. Both of the meeting minutes have been attached there. It looks like there was a edit to the agenda to add the meeting minutes, and so if you haven't taken the time to review those yet, we can do that. And then we also have Mallory here today to talk about one of the applicants for the Sustainability, Equity, and Justice Fund. A quick information about that is the reason that Mallory is presenting today, coming out of a meeting that Mallory, Aston, and I had in the committee task force. We saw that it might be most appropriate to have the Office of Civic Engagement present members. It's still being presented by the chair of that committee that's being appointed to, but we saw it most appropriate as having an unbiased or third party person that is then going to be sharing information about the committee, since it is interesting how we are chairs of all of these committees and then appointing people to those committees. And so we thought it would be nice to have the Office of Civic Engagement, since they are the one who currently are in charge of committees and operate the committee application form currently. So, yeah, well, do you want to share a little bit about the applicant, Mallory?
Yeah, totally. Thank you for that intro. It seems like here going forward, if you ever have applicants to committees, I'll be here to present them, so it's great. Yes, Jackson Huso, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing their last name right, is applying to be a student at large on the Sustainability, Equity, and Justice Fund Committee. They're a junior in the Fair Human Interdisciplinary concentration. It's their major, and they heard about the committee from an advisor that they have. That's all that they said on that. And they've volunteered in the past in elementary schools, worked to lead various clubs and organized campus and community events here in Bellingham and in their hometown. I'm kind of just reading the thing. I don't want to mess up any of the information. They've had a multitude of lived experiences related to diversity, both related and unrelated to their identities. They currently hold a position as an inclusion assistant on campus and in an internship with the Office of Equity. These experiences compound on their academic studies regarding education and social justice, that's their minor, and the rhetoric and social change, which is their major through their interdisciplinary concentration, to inform approaches and knowledge based on diversity-related issues. Yeah, they're just applying to be a student at large, so not taking a club rep spot or anything like that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Any questions or?
Are there any additions that you want to add in?
Yeah, with this seat being filled, that will make our committee fully seated. We are done meeting for the rest of this quarter, so their first meeting wouldn't be until January. But I've had back and forth conversation with them via email, and they seem like they would be a great fit. They're enthusiastic about it, and they have came to the past 2 meetings just as a spectator to see if they are down to do this, and they've been ecstatic to get started. So
that's great.
Do we need a couple more minutes for everybody to review the meeting minutes? I'd like to open the floor for a motion to approve the consent items.
I have a couple edits, just one word changes. It's in the minutes from the 16th, so document 2, in information items for Gaza statement updates. So there's 2 paragraphs where it says it's talking about where I was saying something. The second one where it says Wong thought is the exact word, and then blah blah blah. They would have to take it structurally, and take needs to be replaced with edit. So that's when we were talking about the statement being edited. And that's I think the only thing. Yeah. I can send it to Rachel.
Yeah, sounds good. Would anybody like to motion to approve the consent items with stated amendment?
Well, I move to approve the consent items with the stated amendment.
Godwin seconds.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the consent items, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
I'm abstaining because I wasn't at one of the meetings for the 16th. Abstaining for the 16th. Even though it's not.
Okay, it passes with 4 yeas and 1 abstain. Okay, next we will be moving on to public forum. It looks like we have nobody here today for that, so next we're going to be moving on to officer reports. As you guys will see, I attached the Board of Trustees meeting is happening next week on the 8th, and so I attached the report that I am going to be, or that is being distributed to the Board of Trustees. And then along with the report as well, I attached the resolutions, or the resolution that we passed earlier this quarter about divestment, since it is an issue. I talked about different student issues, and I thought it would be important to include the different statements that we are referencing there, especially since students have been pretty active on campus, and so I just kind of hit on a couple of different things, mainly engagement, communication, a little bit of an update about the amendment to the student charter, student government charter, just clarifying some timelines of what that's going to look like. And then I talked about student issues. 3 of them are the violence in Gaza, and how the campus climate has impacted in that, and then how the different steps that we're going to be taking. We haven't had our resolution passed yet, or else I would have included that. And that's going to be talked about later today. Then I talked about the Fairhaven and Outback Farm. Lots of students have been very worried about that. Student senators have been working about securing funding for that within Fairhaven or within DRAC, and so they've been doing pretty amazing work there. So I wanted to talk about that, since I've heard a lot about that from constituents and then also student senators. And then I also talked about fossil fuel investment, since students have been talking about that on campus. There was an event today, and then over 580 students at the time that I saw the letter of support from a student club on campus. 579 students had signed it, so I included that, and a couple of quotes collected from the letter of support, both from alumni and then also from a current student. And then on top of this, I didn't have a statement ready to go and attached, and I also thought it might be kind of a lot. I am also presenting at the foundation board on December 7th, and I'm going to be talking about a couple of different issues, including clarifying to them what the role of student government is, kind of the role that we play within the institution, taking some wording from the charter that we've been working on and clarifying a little bit about that. And then I'm talking about a couple of different issues on campus that we hope to work with the foundation to address. So these includes meeting students' basic needs, ensuring that there's student representation within the foundation, and within areas of concern for students, and then also talking about creating a culture of gratitude on campus is one thing that I've worked with the foundation. So there's 3 things that I've met with them about, and hopefully can talk a little bit more about in depth. So yeah, and then I think that those are kind of the 2 big things that are coming up next week. Yeah, does anybody have any questions about anything? I think that's all. Got it?
Just one thing in the violence in Gaza issue, you could say that we sent out the email at the beginning of this month. I know you've already sent it to the board, so we can't get it, but just it's important to clarify, it's like the end of November we sent out, not because like right now and everything, I'm like, we're good, and I was like, oh, but we didn't send it out on November 1st, we sent it out like November 20 something. So yeah, that's that thing. And then for the fossil fuel divestment resolution, I know there was just a response from Brandon DuPont about they didn't necessarily also pass the resolution. It was like they were supporting the resolution, which was just a little note for clarifying. It was kind of an interesting fact we said reading.
I was going to talk about that during my report.
Yeah, it's attached on the resolution that we attached. It says, passed with amendments, and then it is the direct quote that Brandon gave within the email that's attached with an asterisk below it. And it's going to be in the official meeting minutes or official documents of the Board of Trustees meeting. I can find the PDF, and it looks like I didn't include the resolution, but that's the only thing that's different about that. Yeah. Okay, next we can move on to the Vice President report for Liam.
Yeah, so, been a busy 2 weeks. SCJF, we had our last meeting of the quarter on Monday. We approved 2 grants, one in excess of $70,000 for increased programming for student athletes and the athletics division surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that was really cool. And then the other grant was $8,150 for Washington, Oregon Higher Education Sustainability Conference scholarships, or WOPESC. Since we're hosting that this year, we wanted to open up access for as many students to attend that as possible. It's like $199 normally, so we opened up 50 slots, and the project team, which is myself, is very excited to get involved in that process of getting that going. But overall, a very successful first quarter for SCJF. Divestment, like Gabe said on Monday, the Faculty Senate supported our resolution, so that's cool. It's kind of out of our hands now, and now we're going to be presenting it to the Foundation and the Board of Trustees. They did have, I'm not sure if the actual resolution or the motion that they passed was amended as much as the email was kind of confusing.
I'll check that.
Okay.
In my report, but for right now.
Okay. You know what, if you clarify now, it'll make minutes so much easier.
Okay. So just in the Faculty Senate meeting, there were some concerns about the title of the resolution, where the title of the resolution says fossil fuel divestment, but then the substance of the resolution says like ESG funds as a way for fossil fuel divestment. So sort of the Faculty Senate was like, they specifically said they were like they supported like what the students wrote. And they were particularly excited about like the transparency, the ESG, and the seats on the whatever the seats were.
Representation.
And yeah, I think there was I think the concern that was brought up was like that fossil fuels are used to like make plastic and like medical devices that like help people survive. That was like the concern.
Okay, thank you. And a quick note on the letter of support that Kira mentioned. As of a couple days ago, it was 590 signatures. Now it is 712, so that's cool. What else? Divestment. There was a divestment teach-in that I just spoke at, just outlining what the heck divestment is. It's a big, scary word, apparently. And yeah, President's Sustainability Council. I'm going to be giving a presentation with Craig Dunn and someone from the foundation on sustainable investing. The next big focus for winter quarter with that is going to be clean energy and how we can make our campus more sustainable in that sector. There is a project that I've been CC'd on about a campus food recovery effort. I don't know many details about that, but I'm very excited to see where that project and what that team can get up to. And yeah, that's really all I have. My laptop died, so kind of forgot my notes there, but if anyone has any questions or comments, I would love to hear them.
What is the WAHAS acronym?
WOHESC is Washington-Oregon Higher Education Sustainability Conference. It's a mouthful.
My question was just, I know I kept forwarding you some of those emails about the back stuff. I was
Yes.
wondering if you had been involved in any of those conversations so far.
Divestment has kind of been dominating my schedule. However, come next week, I'm going to be sitting down with a couple of students who work and volunteer at the Outback and just sort of, I guess, join on to the effort that I know Lola and the College of the Environment Senators have been kind of spearheading. So just seeing where I can fit into that. So at this time, I only have information and bits and bobs from different people, but come next week, I will be getting more involved in that.
Can you include me in that meeting that you're
Yeah.
gonna be having? Because I was trying to meet with the
Job title?
the director about that, so.
Yeah.
Okay, next we can move on to the Vice President report from Sophie.
One second, let me grab my stuff. So, most of my stuff going on is with, Counseling, Health, and Wellness Committee. And obviously I'm doing charter discussions with Gabe and Kira and Adam and I forgot his name. John. Which are great, going well, I feel like, good discussions. Very healthy, like, dynamic, lots of healthy discussion. But Counseling, Health, and Wellness Committee, I mean, the birth control vending machines are finally getting closer to being done. We have funding, which is great. And, but there is not a lot else because they're expensive. But I'm also looking to appoint some more people. So I've been talking to people who seem interested, mostly like club leaders. Don't have the VP for activities head yet, so I've kind of been just like reaching out directly to people that I think might be interested in the Counseling, Health, and Wellness. I got a little bit back, but not, I think it's end of the quarter, so people are kind of like slowed down, but I'm hoping that next quarter I can get 2 people appointed to that committee.
Super exciting to hear. Okay, next we'll move on to a report from Erin.
Okay, I have a lot, so I'm gonna time myself so I make sure I'm on time. On Tuesday, I had a meeting with President Lundala with Nora Selander, who's the Director of Government Relations, to discuss the Legislative Affairs Council legislative agenda. And that was a 30-minute meeting. It was really productive. We talked about, we chose like our top 3, some of our top 3 issues, which is supporting undocumented students and removing hiring restrictions, the operational student employees union and our support for that, and just generally improving student health on campus and how we can ask the legislature to support that in addition to working with the university. And there were other things that are more university specific that I brought up with President Sabah, like things like parking and like accessibility of like certain buildings. So yeah, I'd love to talk to you more about that because I'm realizing I should have done that beforehand. But after the meeting, I realized there were some things that I forgot to mention. So I had a follow up with Nora Selander about those things, and she's going to be in contact with President Rondala and the university. And he expressed interest in having another meeting in January as the legislative agenda shapes up and finalizes more. So I'm really excited about that. And later in the evening, we had our Legislative Affairs Council meeting. And in that meeting, we were able to transfer the format of our agenda away from being, like transitioning from intersectional identities to how those intersectional identities apply to legislative issues that affect students. And so the categories that were using is going to be financial aid, student employment, and then health and wellness. And we're considering adding basic needs as its own category. And we divided up the work, so each of those areas is going to have members doing research and just bringing us more information that we can include. And they're going to be doing presentations this upcoming Tuesday. The upcoming Tuesday meeting is going to be the last meeting of the quarter. And I'm gonna come in next week and be presenting what we have so far. And yeah, that's what I have on the LEC meeting. In terms of lobby day, we are really getting through on the logistical planning challenges. That has been something that's been consuming my time. But our bus and hotel contracts have been secured, so we'll be able to get there and sleep there. We are awaiting confirmation on like the space reservations, so like using the BU the day of, and we're still working on food, like securing food. If y'all have any suggestions, I would happily take them. And then of course the biggest logistical challenge is going to be arranging legislators, but we'll have to wait to do that until the beginning of the year, which is what we're planning to do. So now that lobby day planning is like shaping up, and like we're getting all these confirmations, we're ready to publicize the event. The WIN event was finalized today and publicized today, and people can go to WIN and RSVP and answer all the questions that are necessary for us to have. I've gone to the publicity center, and they're gonna have the posters printed, publishing them on Monday, and then we're also going to be working on a banner to put up, social media and flyers. So that is really exciting that we're going to be able to publicize the event. The event is almost ready to go, and what we're actually going to be lobbying on is coming together. Yes, and solid.
Exciting. Next we'll move on to a report from Gabe.
Yeah, so other than the fossil fuels resolution at Faculty Senate this last Monday, they also approved going through and looking at courses from the past 8 quarters to make sure that they comply with every college's new course modality policy, and then they're still looking, I think, at the EPRC, which was sort of the Faculty Senate like budget committee, but that one hasn't really been, kind of just been wasting much of faculty's time. So what they're trying to do is just get another faculty seat on the university budget committee, which is a sort of new committee that I think is it a brand new one here, you know, or is it like a few years old?
I'm unsure.
Okay, well, whatever, the one that me and Kira are on, which would bring the total faculty representation on that committee up to 4. But yeah, and then they did the fossil fuel benefit thing that we talked about earlier. The Senate has appointed a new graduate senator. I don't know if I said this already, but Ellen Estevez is our new graduate senator. We're still looking to appoint one more graduate senator and a CSE, a College of Science and Engineering senator. And then at our last meeting, we adopted new parliamentary procedure and rules of office, the same ones that we kind of presented at training. So those are the ones that the Senate will be using. Since there were technically rules of office for the Senate, yeah, they were like board ones, but I'll be bringing those up probably next quarter and talking to Kira about that in our check-in. Yeah, I think that's all I've got.
Okay, next we'll go on to the advisory report from Adam.
Whoop whoop, L'Oreal advisory report for this evening's meeting. These are timed perfectly. Again, reminder, spread to everybody you know, senders, timesheets tonight. This is critically important because it leads into my next update item, which is budget. I am currently immersed in our quarterly budget review for both of the operational budgets for this body as well as the student senate. As part of that review, a couple of items have come to light. I will be presenting updated budgets to both groups and probably working through some exercises with you, both to have routine budget updates presented to this body, since you don't tend to have that as far as I know thus far, at least on a quarterly basis. I'll probably recommend actually monthly, so you are all in tune with your budget. And I will just say there may be any impacts to hours allowed next quarter or the quarter after, because 90% of your budget is staff.
Well, just clarify, both me and Kira do get the monthly budget. Me and Kira both get the monthly budget like email, but I don't think anyone else does.
I appreciate the monthly budget email, and I will give you far more detail that is contained in said monthly budget email, because there are some very important details that are not included in that email. Yes, please.
Recognize as a hypothetical, but is, when you say that budgets or hours might be impacted, are you sort of leaning towards less hours allowed, or?
That is potential, and so what we are budgeting from the approved budget by the Finance Council from last year, the estimates of salary hours to be used and versus the actual that have been used, what we have in remaining budget, and making sure that you have plenty of advanced warning should it be needed to go from, say, 19 hours a week to 18 hours a week.
Gotcha.
19 hours a week to 2 hours a week in the extreme, right? We'll walk through those scenarios. I'm not saying doom and gloom right now. I want you aware that we're looking at that, and I'll bring that to you all so that you are fully informed.
Yeah, thank you for the update. Okay, next we can move on to, or does anybody have any questions for Adam? Sorry. Okay.
Are those like budget presentations gonna start like next quarter?
Yes, I may have something as early as next week as a preliminary that I can share with you all. And I guess I should back up. Part of this also has to do with the requests I've heard from individuals to potentially work over intercession and during break. I can, with full voice, say that that was not budgeted originally, so that's not an expectation currently. It may be allowable in very, very limited cases. I'm going to be very conservative with your budget over particularly the winter break. But I will share more by email on that, of course, before we get to break, so y'all can plan. And really, the fundamental concept is take your dang breaks. Okay.
Okay, next we're going to move on to the information items with guests. So we have Isaac today here with us from the Office of Civic Engagement. Isaac is the elections coordinator, and so is going to be running the student government elections this year. And so in order to do that, we need to amend the Elections Advisory Committee charge and charter, which you're here today to present.
Yeah, I have it all up here. It's gone. So here it is. So yes, this isn't a, there are some changes in here. Most of them are relatively small ones compared to the previous charter. The first one you can see is up on the top. I was informed by my director that we wanted to sort of move away from yearly expiring charge and charters. I think the ultimate goal was to be like a 3-year, like staggered thing, so we don't have all of the charge and charters coming out at once. But that this is just so that like you can see when it was last passed, so then we'll know like if it's been a couple of years, we should probably get around to getting it updated, but we don't have to get it updated every year, so we don't have to go through it every year. So that's the top one. The next one is updating the membership a little bit. Previously on the charge and charter, the representative other than me from the Office of Civic Engagement has been the AS Voter Engagement and Recruiting Coordinator. Unfortunately, this year, the person in that position, it just doesn't work out well for them to act as a member on this committee. So we are hoping to make it so that the director of the OC could then choose which staff member or themselves to chair, or not chair, to be a member on that committee. So we have some more flexibility so we can get people who actually, still someone from the Office of Civic Engagement, but someone who can make it. So that was the second change. I guess there's some formatting changes, don't really know. They're just what they are.
Sorry to interrupt, Isaac. Advisor procedural question. Would you like questions on changes as you go or held until the end?
I can see there's fine. I can go either way, whichever one you guys prefer.
You're running it your preference. You tell us.
Then I'll just take them as they come up then. We don't remember.
In that case, advisor question on that change. I heard implied in your statement that it's intended that the as designated by the OCE engagement director, is a staff member of OCE. I would recommend making that explicit change in that line, just to add. It's more language, but.
One thing that I would suggest too is knowing, so I actually was serving as the elections coordinator when they added the voter engagement and recruitment coordinator, and that was done since there was explicit want from the person in that position to be on this committee, and that was added to this committee. And so previously, until 2 years ago, that position wasn't on here, it was just the AS elections coordinator. And so I am in total support of, we don't necessarily need an additional person, especially if it's overburdensome for the Office of Civic Engagement to do so, since we already have 3 to 5 students at large, we have a student senator, we have an executive board member, and so we do have a lot of represented groups already. It's not necessarily a requirement that we also have another person from the Office of Civic Engagement, just as some background there too.
Okay. I don't think it's that much of a burden to first have a office member. I think just in this particular instance, it was that particular position, the person that couldn't make it. But I guess either way works, if it's either there or not. Yeah.
Sorry, advisor point, leaving it in leaves you flexibility. It can remain an unseated position at the discretion of the OCE director.
Yeah.
Rachel, are you able to scroll down so we can look at the rules of operation where there were some changes made to there as well?
Yeah. Oh, well, I guess there is one technical, so there's, actually, that skips 2, one of them which didn't really matter because one of the verbiage changed, but there was one that I think you guys might want to hear about, which is that we were trying to change the quorum rules a little bit so that so that it's now to pass, for us to have quorum, it is only a majority of the seated members, which means the members that we've actually placed on the committee and we know that are part of the committee, both the staff members and the student representatives, because hopefully it'll be different this year, but in the past, this has not always been the most popular committee to have student representatives on, because it's elections. I'm the one that finds it interesting, and that's why I work in the job, but it's unpaid, so we don't get that many people, so this was a way that we are able to start if we can't get as much student representatives as we like, they're not then empty seats for the sake of quorum. It would only matter for the people who are seated on the committee. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm speaking up a lot, especially as the erstwhile advisor of said group. Did you consider a minimum number for quorum, i.e. what stops quorum being 1 if seated membership is 2?
I guess that's fair. I can add something like that.
Yeah, I think that would be good.
Because that was just, yeah, sorry.
I would also say I think it would be best, especially since it's given the nature of the committee, if it's seated membership, including both the student senator and an executive board member, to ensure that both of those seats are filled before quorum can be met.
Okay. The one thing with that was that last year we actually had a little bit of a problem with regular attendance by executive board and Senate members in the committee. I was a student representative, so I have some experience where it was like last year. And we didn't have both of those members at all times for large parts of that. So that was just something like that, although if that's something you want, I can add that.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I definitely understand that. If that happens again, it'll be conversation to have with Adam, and so it probably won't be a problem this year. And then also, even if they're unable to attend every single meeting, just ensuring that those positions are seated before quorum can be, or like that they're physically filled, and then we're like, okay, well, we have 3 people. We have the elections coordinator, the senator, and the executive board member. 2 people can show up and that can be quorum or something like that.
Yeah. That sounds good. Nice. Moving on to the rules of operations. This is the last really big change. I haven't had a ton of time to adapt to the position as I was only hired relatively recently, but one of the first things I did was when I was looking through my email and noticed that you sent out an email that was saying that you guys are encouraging all the committees to try and adopt a standardized form of parliamentary procedures and rules of operation. And I was in a position where I could actually do that as someone who was amending their charge and charter so late. So this would It keeps how we previously did it, which was that the committee itself could adopt its own rules of operations with your guys' consent. But then it also established that our default rules of operation would be the standard parliamentary rules of procedure and rules of operation that you guys established. So far, I only have the draft documents that you guys sent out, but presumably these would either be amended to, or they would just refer to the finalized versions of those documents, which we would then adopt as our basic rules of operation.
Yeah, thank you for including that. We haven't officially passed either of those, but as was mentioned earlier, that's hopefully something that's going to happen next quarter. So
Yeah. The ones that were passed that are in the, I'll send them to you again.
Okay.
With the finalized version, the one that the Senate will be using in the immediate future, and the one that I'll be bringing up in some amount of future. I think that's your way to so you know what sort of we're running on, if that's what you want to do. And in those ones, it's very explicit that I think they can be changed by or at least the rules of law can be changed by the committee.
I think some clarification though is important, since that wasn't passed by the executive board, that was just passed by the Senate, and there was no explicit statement that that's like for everyone, like implemented that in the student Senate doesn't necessarily implement that everywhere, so I just want there to be that clarification.
Yeah, that's the other thing, is like passing it before the thing is fully passed, it's gonna be weird.
Yeah.
So that, a little more clarity.
Okay, so then is it okay that I pass it like this, that it refers to that thing that's coming up hopefully, but that is not yet around?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
And I guess we'll just then use your proposed drafts until then.
Does anybody else have any further questions for Isaac? Well, thank you so much for coming. I know how scary it can be sometimes to come to executive board meetings and present on charters. So we're so thankful that you've done all of this work, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we will see you next week, same time. So have a great day.
Thank you. This all you have your time as well.
Thank you. Okay, next we're going to move on to information items. We have 2 information items today. Number 1 is going to be the ceasefire resolution, also titled "Standing with Our Students and Calling for a Ceasefire in Palestine and Israel." We have 20 minutes to discuss today.
I can check that was sponsored by me. I'm assuming it's sponsored by me. It is sponsored by me.
Yes,
so I didn't write it. So this this resolution came out of the hope that we would, not stop our sort of action that was a statement. And it's been worked on for like 3 weeks now. And in its current form, basically just mentions some of the activism on campus, mentions what sort of our role is, and that's like supporting students, and then calls on, there's a little bit of historical background, and then calls on our senators, U.S. representatives, and the president to sort of implement a ceasefire. And I think that kind of gets to it. I have, in its current form, as it was presented on the agenda, there's some citations missing. I have collected all of those, and I would then ready to add those if you wanted to add them in this meeting. There's also a few potential questions that we still could answer, that's sort of what I thought. I maybe want to start out sort of hearing with Aaron, if you, I don't know if LAC had talked about this in any of his meetings yet, so I know it was sent out for last Tuesday.
Yeah, it was something that wasn't able to be put on the agenda because we have hour-long meetings and they've been pretty tight with the legislative agenda. I have spoken to our Ethnic Student Center staff representative, Cole Farhat, and he is an Arab American, and he had some comments that I could share. I mean, I probably should share. I told him to share. One slightly minor change is where it says, whereas Arab, Muslim, Palestinian, Israeli, and Jewish students have been particularly impacted by all these discrimination and phobias, he suggested that we move Palestinian to the forefront of that statement, and made a suggestion in our whereas, in the whereas section, and the last part of it to say, infrastructure has been destroyed in order to hinder the advancement of Palestine, like hospitals, civilian homes, mosques, churches, communication facilities, schools, etc. But Kira and I had discussed this, and that is like a major change to make to the document, and we're not sure if we want to have like big amendments or if we want to go ahead and like get this passed tonight. But I am in favor of moving Palestinian to the front of the list where it's listed.
I think one thing too that's important is we usually do introduce something as an information item and then have it come back as an action item so that we can fully be an understanding of the implication that it has, the impact that it has, and fully have like informed ability to understand what we are passing. And so I think it's really important that we kind of understand exactly what this is asking before we have the ability to pass it, and especially what the impact it will be, not only sending this document out, but the possible impact that it can have on students, community members, and that. So I just wanted to put that out there as well, because I think that's kind of a conversation that we should have within this group. And then kind of go into what are changes that we would like to be made. If so, what are they? Further questions that we have.
Yeah, I think that's right on. I would sort of like to hear from the people that haven't been in the conversation. So Morgan, Liam, and Sophie sort of about both like what's written, if this fits in with the idea of like where you think we should be moving documentation and things like that.
First off, I think this is great. I do want to open up a question for everyone here, and for complete transparency, everything that I've heard about what I'm about to talk about has been secondhand, so keeping that in mind, with the statement on the whereas on November 17th, around 300 Western students and community members gathered on campus to, as part of the National Shut It Down for Palestine campaign, I did hear that there was a specific moment in that demonstration where I don't know if it was Board of Trustees members or Foundation members.
Can we pause the conversation for a second? I understand what you're referencing, and us as a board do not support that. And so we don't want to be engaging or like, we don't want to be showing support for anything that we're mentioning here. We are showing direct support for.
That's what my question was going to be. Given that instance, is there going to be any correlation drawn between what we're saying and those events, do you think?
They shouldn't be. There was a mention in an earlier form of this document where it mentioned what happened in a disruption of a meeting on campus, and it was explicitly taken out after a meeting that Gabe and I were in with Adam and Leona, where we decided to take that out, since we're trying to talk about where there are large groups of students, so like 300, 100, more than a dozen, or even just like hundreds of students gathering on campus is really impactful in what we're responding to. I don't necessarily know if it's appropriate to respond to 6 or 7 student activism that's happening on campus that was extremely disruptive, because anything that we are including, we are showing direct support for.
Yeah, clarity on that. What I got from the meeting was sort of the reason I was in support of taking that out is because it's sort of detracts from the call for a ceasefire, because it's like the president and, the senators and our representative don't control our foundation. So telling them that like some people were opposing voting maybe wasn't like as specific as possible. Like, I mean, it's also just, there's always going to be a balance in resolutions between like how broad you want to make it, how you want to include absolutely everything, or yeah. So I think that was sort of where I was like, okay, yeah, we can get rid of that. In my personal view, I do support the 8 or dozen students that disrupted the foundation or the knowing foundation meetings, but yeah, so.
Yeah, but it's important to separate individual support and what our board supports publicly and explicitly. Just how I have individual politics that I feel extremely strong about this topic, but what I think is appropriate for us as a student government to explicitly show support of, those two things I see as completely different.
Okay, and my question wasn't going to be whether or not we add something about that, saying that we support that specific action. It was more so just about how everyone here felt about a possible correlation that could be drawn between that event and then the more disruptive action.
I definitely think that there is a possibility for a correlation to be brought there, especially since us as a board have, our previous resolution was about the foundation and now we're releasing this resolution. So I don't think that there's anything that should support that correlation, and hopefully isn't, but there is the possibility that that is an impact that can come out of this. To clarify for what we're talking about, there was on November 17th, there was a disruption of a foundation meeting that was happening with Boeing on campus in the Viking Union, and it was extremely disruptive to their meeting. And it was about between 6 or a dozen students that protested inside the Viking Union in their meeting.
I would love to hear from Sophie and Morgan.
That was going to be my clarifying question too, actually, so I'm glad you brought that up. Because I know we had more than one event on the 17th happen, so just to get further clarification on that helped a lot. But I think this looks really good though. Just the small changes that were mentioned within the language, I think it would be beneficial.
Do we think it would be beneficial, any language change then, to be made to the November 17th to explicitly just call out the rally and not the connection to the other events that happen on campus?
Was that the other event, the disruptive one, related to the Shut It Down for Palestine, or was that a separate, organized separately, the two were not?
Separate.
Okay, then I don't see any reason to mess with that whereas statement.
And I think it does very specifically call out the rally, and the community members rallied.
Good.
Yeah. Okay, Sophie.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have a lot to say about this. I feel like we're representing students well with this. I think that the language is, I think it's really comprehensive. I haven't had as much of in my work that I've been doing, I haven't been as close to this issue, so I didn't want to talk about it too much because I want to separate my, I also have very strong views about this, and I want to separate my views from this, and I want to make sure that I'm doing my job of representing who I've been talking to and what I've been hearing, but I think that we're being very supportive in this, and you guys did a really good job.
I don't think I want to add just another good context. I last night just went through a bunch of other student government minutes as accessible as some of them are, some of them aren't. I think we do the best job out of all the student governments in terms of accessibility, so as much as our website is broken half the time, we're still great. Yeah.
I'm sorry, can you state that again louder for the record for all those IT folks listening to the live stream?
For the record, we're pretty good in comparison to the other associated students. Yeah, but it seems like the other the Associated Students have mostly done sort of the like statements of support like we did before. I'm not aware, but also could be the case, I'm not aware of any other student government that has called for a ceasefire, or at least in Washington. I think there have been others across the country, but not in Washington, to my knowledge. Public colleges,
On a November 17th, I went to the WSA Board of Directors meeting, which has every AS president from all of the public schools in Washington State and a couple of community colleges. And nobody has called for a ceasefire.
Not even Evergreen?
Evergreen is not part of the WSA Board of Directors, so they were not there. So there is a possibility that they could
I would think that.
Yeah.
Not to stereotype or anything, but
and then I think kind of talking about the impact that this is going to have, we are specifically asking and calling out our representatives and asking them to take action. The reason that we're doing that is as a preface, we've never had a resolution really on an international issue before, international policy, anything like this before. We explicitly have not dealt with that since it's not been within our umbrella of things that we cover. We don't really have a lot of impact on international policy, and have not spoken out on a lot of things previously. And the reason that we decided to on this is, number one, it's because we see it as an appropriate government agency. We specifically call out representatives that represent Western students, and then also the impact that students here have experienced. That's why we're talking about that, compared to we could talk about what's happening in the Congo right now and release a resolution on that and hope for our legislators to stand with that, but we're not going to, since students here really haven't been directly affected and they haven't asked for us to take action, or they haven't rallied on campus, they haven't asked for administration to do anything about it. And so explicitly listening to student concerns and it being an appropriate government agency, we see it as appropriate. So my only hope is that this doesn't set a precedent that we then continue to make resolutions on every international issue, though that would be very fun for me. I think it would be very interesting, and I would like to have very big opinions on things, but I hope this doesn't become the norm after this, and only when there is explicit student want and we hear from our constituents that it's something that they need, and is a continued way to support them.
The other thing to bring up is we had tried to get it to the LAC just because there's more diverse perspectives there, and I think people in the LAC have seen it and given a little bit of input, but hasn't been formally gone to the LAC or anything like that. I just kind of like to get everyone's perspective on whether we want to try to take it to the LAC formally, or if we think that it's good in its form, and sort of question here and we're focused on prayer.
Yeah, I brought it up to the LAC members multiple times and told people that my door's open for any comments or suggestions that they want to provide, and there's only been one student who's really expressed interest in that, and I'm getting communication. And so the opportunity has been put forth that really hasn't been utilized, so I don't think it's necessary to pursue that any further.
One thought that I have is, this is a question for you, Gabe, is why isn't it going through the student government? You are, or not student government, going through the student senate. You are the draftee of this document. It has been edited with other individuals, but you are the draftee. You are the chair of the student senate. And I think that this is something that student senators would be really interested in, at least some of them as far as my knowledge. And I know that there's the implicit want, since it talks about governmental agencies and representatives, but I wanted to know if there's anything deeper than that or more than that of why it's not going through the student senate.
Yeah, I think it was maybe it would be ideal to go through the Senate, but at this point the student senate is not likely to meet on the 4th, and I think the reason why it was going who the exec board is, because the exec board is, that's the body that does the appropriate governmental agency sort of thing. So I think the other thing is it's sort of, senators have seen a version of this, and I've talked to a few of them, and there was space for input. And the, like I think sort of the impact of a resolution, whether at the top of the resolution it says, like executive board and Senate, or just executive board, I don't think Maria Cantwell knows the intricacies of our student government enough to actually care whether it was passed by the student senate and the executive board. That's sort of my thought there, is in terms of this was really like more and that like there was maybe like 2 opportunities for it to just get put before the Senate, but in the way things played out, so it just didn't end up happening.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that for a second if I could. We discussed a lot about the proper procedure for resolutions, and it's pretty clear in the application that for Senate resolutions, they really should only pertain to academic matters, and that the executive board is the body that relates to external government agencies and basically everything else.
But yeah, what Aaron said, just to clarify for Senate, is academics and the university to some extent. But yeah, I think that's really like the reason to get it passed by both bodies is for it to be the position of the entire associated students. And it's not necessarily like the most useful, I think, in this situation, especially with just logistically, sort of that, yeah.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. We're almost out of time for this item. The other thought that I have of something in addition that can be made is there's a temporary ceasefire happening right now. We don't necessarily address that language that's happening and call for a continued ceasefire. We just call for a ceasefire blanketly, and I think that there is some confusion right now, at least that I've seen on people that I've talked to in social media, the confusion between a permanent ceasefire, a temporary ceasefire, and a temporary ceasefire, like, oh, we already have that. And so I don't want this to necessarily be dismissed because of that as an addition that can be made, since it has been continually, the temporary ceasefire, I think, is still in effect today, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, I'll speak to that. I have like a formal amendment that I've written that includes all of the citations. I don't know if we want to go through the list of every citation because that has like some amount of impact, but I try to get like a broad-ish scope, and then also a few tiny edits. One of them being including after, if you want to zoom in, Rachel, in the resolving clauses after where it says non-combatants. It's going to be at the bottom. The that statements.
Like further down.
Yeah, for the second page. Yeah. So where after the resolving clause, the ASWWU exec board condemns all violence against civilians and non-combatants, inserting a new line that the ASWWU executive board supports a long-term ceasefire and a just peace in Israel and Palestine, was the language I was sort of supporting for. If we don't support a just peace or don't want to specifically call that out, it could just be a long-term ceasefire, sort of as an amendment. Against that one.
I would be most comfortable, since there's such a big impact and there's several edits that we need to be made. It seems like they're pretty substantial, and then also changes in the wording from Aaron. It seems like we're making, at least from what I can count, like at least minimum like 5 edits in addition of a new line. I would feel most comfortable if we all were able to see the document in its physical form with the final edits that we've discussed today next Thursday. Aaron and I discussed in a previous meeting earlier this week, was it this week? Earlier this week, that if we wanted to open it up to people, and if there were any edits that we made, for it then to come back next Thursday so that we can all physically understand and have a better understanding of what we're passing, especially since this was shared with everybody yesterday when meeting minutes, or when the meeting agenda went out. We really only had a day for at least half of the board to fully understand it. And so it might be beneficial, I think it would be most beneficial for it to come back next Thursday and us officially vote on it then as a action item.
I sort of posed the question to the people that just saw it yesterday or sort of what you guys are thinking.
Well, I don't necessarily think everybody needs to speak out.
Well,
And sorry, advisor clarification, I just heard the chair state that the procedure was going to be bring edits back for next week for consideration in a full document, which is not procedurally an item up for question necessarily if that's the chair's decision.
If people would like to overrule the chair, that's possible, and like we can bring it up to a vote to that level if we want to, but I think I'm honestly, with something of this impact, I feel most appropriate of it coming back and us at least having, I like to sleep on stuff and think about it and fully understand, especially with the additions that were being made.
Just a question, I can make time at the next LEC meeting. Is this something that we do want to be touched on? If we want to have more eyes on it?
They've already looked at it enough, and you guys have expressed that you're so busy with all of the agenda, and like you're writing a lot, so I don't want to take away from that because I understand the level of intensity that is, and I don't necessarily think the want is done for the LEC to approve it either, to be the executive board, so.
Sounds good.
Is there any further discussion on this?
One last amendment. In the last conversation I had about this, I think it was with just you, Kirsten, Karen, I would say or something. We had removed any mention of military aid, and that was, there were a few specific lines about that, but so when I saw like what sort of we had finished editing in the meeting and what was sent to the LEC, the statement where it says that at these demonstrations, hundreds of students called for a ceasefire, it said, it previously said called for a ceasefire and end military aid. I think that sort of goes in line with sort of all of the military aid stuff, but I had mentioned, I thought we were sort of in some sort of understanding that there was previously a mention of getting senators' office, or like calling on senators to oppose the supplemental appropriations to Israel that has already passed the House, just as like a thing without sort of, and it would only at this, that it would only tie to the statement of students supporting, or like the protests supporting end to military aid. So I'm just wondering if that is something that, I don't know, just like, just wanted to mention that as a potential to either put back in or leave out.
Yeah, a little bit of clarification about that is, so the reason that military aid was removed is because that's more in line with international policy. We don't take stances on international policy, and there were similar statements that were removed, like completely ending any like support of Israel by the United States, or any like very broad statements that were also in what students were calling for, and we removed anything like that and really just called for a ceasefire, because that is what we are within our duties of the executive board to call for and really act on. We aren't an international actor, so when we're really just calling for a ceasefire. If we would like to add military aid back in, that's a conversation that we can have. But I think that we should extend more time to this item if we would like to discuss military aid being added back into this.
Because we have another information item on our agenda, if we were to discuss that more, we would have to like extend the time of this meeting.
Possibly, but.
I'm fine with discussing this more with the amendments that we've talked about at next week's meeting. Just so we have like everything already in front of us and then we can go from there, rather than like, I know right now, again, laptop's dead, I'm trying to remember all of these in my head and it's just not working.
Yeah, okay. I will next week take I'd like you to send me the specific verbiage that, and you, not going to Aaron, for the Cole had sent you, and then I will have the draft changes on that next week.
Okay, sounds good. Next, we are going to be moving on to a discussion of the WSA fee increase. Yes, Lee?
I'm against it. 100%.
Before the information has even been given.
Yeah,
I
thank you.
know what I stand for.
Thank you for sharing your opinion. Everybody's opinion is valid and very valued in this conversation. So a little bit of background, the Washington Students Association, we are a member of. We have the Legislative Action Fund, which the LAC controls. There is, it is every student pays, I think, $1 per quarter into this fee, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so everybody pays $1 into this. The WSA originally is priced at $15,000. They have been costing $15,000 since 2008 when they originally started. They are supposed to give us representation in terms of a lobbyist on behalf of WSA. They hold conferences twice a year, and then they also provide support for our student lobbyist that we have. So that is Stella this year through the Office of Civic Engagement, and she goes and lobbies in Olympia all winter quarter, which is super exciting, and the WSA provides some support there. And so they originally cost $15,000 to be a part of. Now they would like to increase that to $30,000. $30,000 was supposed to start this year. It was not liked by anybody, and no member colleges could afford it except for Central. And so it has come to the board of directors. We've amended it and moved it to the start of between 2024 and 2026. That is still not working out for everybody. And I have thoughts on it. And essentially, in order for us to increase the fee, it's going to cost $30,000 out of the Legislative Action Fund, which we can accommodate for a year max, maybe 2 years max. But that would essentially drain all of the Legislative Action Fund. And then we would need to increase the fee for students from $1 to $2. And in order to do that, that needs to go before the student body at the student election that's coming up. Important information to have though is the Legislative Action Fund was not one of the fees listed to the students in the possible increases for fees this year. It is really only $1 increase, but in all transparency, what went before the Board of Trustees earlier this year, the Legislative Action Fund was not one that has been included. And so even if it is like $1, just like throwing that on to students right when they're getting ready to pay tuition, if it is voted on this year, is a lot, and it kind of does bring up the question, is WSA worth it? What are the benefits of having WSA? And yeah, it is essentially a little bit of more clarification. The WSA fee increase was voted on, I think, 2 or 3 years ago by the WSA Board of Directors, which has every AS president. The documentation that states the 10-year plan and when it was voted on, they don't have access to. They say it's in forms of slides. They haven't provided it to me. I've asked for it 2 weeks ago now, and they still do not have it and haven't responded to my emails. There are concerns that we have had amongst sustainability within the organization, and then also I have continued concerns of documentation of the organization and the ability to provide information. They're also supposed to provide support for us for our voter hubs and other things that the Office of Civic Engagement has done. I worked in the Office of Civic Engagement for 2 years, and they had not provided any support out of support for the Director of Legislative Affairs. So, yeah.
I'll be more mild-mannered. You said that they're supposed to provide support to the DOLA, but they didn't.
Or they do.
Okay.
They provide different forms of support specifically, and they have an office space that they are able to use, and they also provide the Director of Legislative Affairs different opportunities, like I think some dinners with legislatures, and then also some like training they do for the DOLA.
So aside from that, and then supposed like advocacy in Olympia, what else do we get with that $15,000, hypothetically $30,000? What else are we getting out of that? Because right now it seems like we're losing a lot more than we're getting.
I can't tell you any other benefits that we get from the organization other than that.
Love that.
Well, in terms of lobbying in Olympia that the WSA does the WSA have its own lobbyists, or are all the lobbyists for WSA just like DOLAs from universities?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So how it works is there is a Director of Legislative Affairs from every single university, and then WSA assigns one of the Director of Legislative Affairs, or one of the Director of Legislative Affairs from one of the member campuses as WSA lobbyist as well. And so the Director of Legislative Affairs for Pullman, they're also acting as the lobbyist for WSA as well. So they do have an additional lobbyist, but it is unclear what, since it is somebody who is also for WSA and also for their member campus, it is unclear the additional support that that person adds. It is important to add, though, that the lobbying efforts of WSA have been extremely successful, or at least things that they have supported. It is unclear the direct role that they have played. Like the Washington College grant, that has continued to be expanded, and different advocacy, like things like I'm a recipient of the Washington College grant, and I'm super grateful for that, but it is unclear if the role WSA played in that, since all member campuses across Washington State and all university admin across the state were advocating for the Washington College grant, even though WSA likes to claim that they were the sole champion of that. You had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, more of a clarifying question. So with the Director of Legislative Affairs, when they go down to Olympia and they're acting as, for example, the Western DOLA, they are lobbying on our behalf, and then they also become the WSA lobbyist? Or no?
No.
Okay.
So our lobbyist, our student lobbyist, is just a Western student lobbyist, but they lobby with all of the other student lobbyists through WSA, and they also get support from WSA. But it is important to note that as soon as the lobbyist does have interaction with WSA in Olympia, there is push from WSA to then include WSA's legislative priorities within Western's priorities. That's something that happened last year, and there was the want to include bills that LAC did not previously vote on because WSA was pushing for NYRA at the time to include it. Also, can you send that?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, our lobbyist is then being, basically, we're paying for them to have to do another job on top of like our agenda. We're paying the $15,000. They're supporting, but at the same time trying to influence their own agenda. Like our students advocate for both agendas. If that made any sense at all, I realize that's
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
That's essentially what's happening.
That's awesome.
With the $30,000, there's also the want for WSA to pay the doulas. I see some very big problem with that as well, since the WSA is not upholding their end of the specific agreements that they've stated of different support that they're going to provide the member campuses. And also, I'm concerned with a doula working for WSA and being paid by WSA. There would be like a contract that would have to happen, but it's a very broader question. And yeah, and I'm sorry I don't have more. WSA is like very bad at providing me information.
It's okay.
I tried to get their 10-year plan to provide some more information that has exactly what they're going to provide us, but they don't even have that themselves, so.
Yeah, no, I will say my one experience with WSA, I wasn't super thrilled, but that's only been one experience. I forgot to mention in my report that I'm going to be attending WSA committee days, which is going to be in Olympia on Monday, and that's an opportunity to meet with legislators and lobbyists and kind of let them know about our legislative agenda, WSA's legislative agenda, and then also like the preliminary stuff that we have at Western. So that's going to be an opportunity for me to like scope things out. But I think given like Kira has a lot of experience with them and you know, like a lot of experience, and I like really like take that to heart. But I also want us all to have the opportunity to like experience it for ourselves, and just all of us being hyper vigilant about the making use of like the funds that we give them and how productive they are with them.
Well, procedurally, is the decision to be a member campus of WSA a decision of the executive board, or is it a decision of the LAC because the LAC is the one who appropriates the legislative affairs fund? Or is it sort of a weird mixed thing where like we can choose to be a member campus and then they can choose not to do the WSA and we get kicked out?
That's a good question. I think that Adam and I can explore that issue a little bit more.
Yeah, we can explore that for sure, and I would just say that the way it's structured, the board of directors of WSA is comprised of executive board presidents of institutions. That connotes that that's kind of your line there.
Yeah.
LAC is a committee of AS governance executive board, ostensibly, but yes, we can get clarification. And
we're not the only member campus. If we discuss leaving WSA, we're not the only member campus having this discussion right now. UW-Tacoma was going to leave this year. They already budgeted their money, so they decided to stay this year. And that was a decision from their executive board. And so it can be a conversation later this year or this academic year. The conversation is either going to be increasing WSA fees, and if we're not increasing the fee, then it becomes a question of member campus or membership of WSA. And so the conversation is going to go in one of those two ways. This is kind of just more me sharing some experiences that we've had and really trying to get everybody up to speed so that when we have a conversation later in the year, it's like, what is WSA? I've never heard of that. What is that? So what do they even do? So, yeah.
One last thing on the logistics, I think it would be helpful for the conversation between you and Kira and Aaron to find the specific text of the either, I think it was probably a referendum for the LAF, because we can't override what the voters decided about the LAC. So even if the LAC is chaired by an exec board member, if the LAC has very specific roles per an election, we have to follow that.
yeah, agreed. I'm talking about the membership agreement with WSA Western and what that.
But yeah, with the money, it's in the LAF that like currently pays for the.
So for clarity on, well, so we can take this discussion offline. I want to have clarity when we're talking about budgets. LAF is a function. There are different budget codes that relate, so I want to be very careful when we're discussing budget codes, because LAF and LACF are two explicitly different budgets. So we want to make sure we have that clarity on nomenclature. So yes, good note, and absolutely we'll, of course, discuss that.
I think Cindy Monger, that's her name. She's like a financial specialist at Western. I think she would be able to help us like find that language, and she's also at the beginning of the quarter like offered more information about like the history of WWU's like involvement in the WSA. So I think that would be like another good resource to reach out to for more context.
We'll coordinate all of the outreach we need to get the information we need.
Yeah, the Legislative Action Fund, it's voted on, I think, every 3 or 5 years by students, and I think it's been voted on while some of us have been students here. I'm trying to go through the elections right now. I'm like, the language is pretty easy to find. So yeah, just an update. We'll have further conversations, and as soon as I have the 10-year plan that WSA supposedly has, that supposedly says we're gonna increase the fees, I will share it. So yeah. Is there any other questions or comments from anybody? This will just be an ongoing conversation, so. Yeah, okay, I would like to adjourn today's meeting at 6:52 p.m.